There's been a lot of activity in psychedelics recently with renewed interest from Michael Pollan's issuance on Netflix with the How to Change Your Mind series to great news on patents as well as drug discovery and development. One of the companies that we've been covering that's at the forefront of drug discovery and development is Mindset Pharma. So, we thought we'd take the opportunity, and James Lanthier, the CEO, was kind enough to join us today just to discuss some of the psychedelic developments as well as some of the things that are happening with his company as well. Hey, James, how are you?
Dwayne, great to see you again. I'm great.
I wanted to ask you, what do you think of the overall sentiment for the psychedelics industry right now, as there's been an uptick in all of this media activity?
From our standpoint at Mindsets, the onward march of progress in the psychedelic space, has continued and really has never slowed down and keeps picking up. I think what we're seeing right now is as kind of the understanding that around the capabilities of these drugs really kind of is permeating, out from, what was at the beginning a relatively kind of small group of scientists and folks in the business to, really getting out there into the public, into the culture. You mentioned the Michael Pollan series on Netflix. I think recently there was the news about, Aaron Rodgers,
Oh,
ascribing one of his, MVP seasons to, the use of ayahuasca. I think kind of no matter where you turn, there is just, more and more understanding that, we really are at kind of a really fascinating point in, I think, medical history where you're going to start to see these drugs. Well, you are seeing these drugs, start to be embraced by regulators and move towards approval. So yeah, definitely. I think as we had predicted, that sentiment keeps growing,
right.
and now you're starting to see it, play out again in the public markets.
You recently put out a letter to your shareholders just detailing some of your developments and just bringing them up to speed on what's happening with Mindset. So can you just give us a bit of color on that and just let us know what your accomplishments have been thus far?
Yeah, absolutely. So Mindset's really shared quite a bit of news, and we've had a lot of positive developments, really kind of over the last 6, 7 months. And we wanted to kind of take a step back and really help investors and the public understand really the importance of those different announcements and kind of how that all maps to the bigger picture. So obviously we're a biotech company. Our ultimate end goal is to get our drugs, new optimized drugs to patients, to help patients with unmet needs. But there are a lot of steps that one goes through to get to that final goal. So really what we wanted to do is kind of help investors understand, how we view ourselves as sort of tracking against those milestones and that progress. And I think, from our point of view, there's really three key elements as you're gearing up to start bringing drugs to clinical trials. Really, number one, you need data to have at least a certain level of confidence that your drugs are going to do what you're hoping they'll do. You need to have strong intellectual property rights to really be able to justify the investment in them. And then thirdly, ideally you need partners, because it takes a really specialized set of skills to discover a new molecule and to do kind of the initial screening and testing. It takes a whole other set of skills to actually take a drug all the way through to into the hands of patients. And I think really, the first half, of the year, I think from our viewpoint, Mindset really has been excelling on all three of those fronts. And I think, if you look from the standpoint of data, Mindset really over the last 2 years has probably released more data on more new drug candidates than I would say anybody else in the medical psychedelic field. From an IP standpoint, we now have, I'd say, probably one of the most bulletproof, solid IP estates in the market. We were able to announce two different notices of allowance from the U.S. Patent Office on two of our key new drug families, and then lastly, partnerships. It takes a lot of capital to take a drug all the way through clinical trials. As we've talked about before, earlier in the year, Mindset announced the first and still only partnership with a big pharma in the medical psychedelic space, Otsuka Pharmaceuticals, where they're funding the development of two of our lead families. And then in addition to that, we also announced a research study that we're doing with CAMH, which who viewers in Toronto would be aware of, but for those who don't know, it's a top psychiatric research hospital in Toronto, where we're studying some of our drugs alongside psilocybin. So I think really when you kind of pull all that together, the totality of it all is, I think it really establishes, the last 6-8 months really have established Mindset as really the premier biotech company in the medical psychedelic space.
There was some drug delivery technology that you've developed as well. So we saw that as a contrast from the IP and the drug discovery stuff that you've been engaging in. So could you just shed some light on some of the synergies between drug delivery and then also drug discovery as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the two really go hand in hand. And this delivery technology that we've developed really is a chemical platform that we've developed that actually uses some of the insights that we've gained from developing some of our new drug families. And if you've watched enough of our investor presentations or seen the presentation, we do talk about this chemical platform that we've identified, and we've filed a lot of IP around. We're filing more around it. We'll be able to talk in greater specificity about it soon. But essentially, what this does, we've tested it with one psychedelic drug, and we're testing it with a series of other ones. It's an intranasal delivery method, and using our chemical technology, what we see is that it really speeds the essentially the in and out of that agent into and out of the brain, much more efficiently than standard delivery technology. So, if you're going to develop a new drug, you also have to, figure out how what they call it route of administration is going to be. And if Mindset is able to own the intellectual property, not only on the new drugs, but also on how they're going to get administered, then that's a really advantageous position for Mindset. We have more work to do on that delivery technology, but we actually think it has applicability really beyond psychedelics to the broader central nervous system drug space, which is obviously an enormous space. So it's something we're really excited about, and it's kind of an example of the innovation engine at Mindset that we keep driving forward.
If people have been following Mindset, they will know that you have the 4 families of drugs. So I was looking at family 3 that involves microdosing. So I wonder if you could just give us a little bit of walkthrough of the market potential for microdosing, and then how would that impact a real life patient?
As you pointed out, the majority of our families are focused on what we call macrodosing. So this is the way that psychedelic drugs are currently being studied today in a clinical setting, where you go in, you take a large dose of the drug and undergo a significant psychedelic experience. The kind of polar opposite of that would be what people refer to as microdosing. Now, microdosing isn't really what we're trying to do here. But we have one of our families, which we call family number 3, is a family that shows some of the same receptor activity as psychedelic drugs do, but at a lower level, at a degree to which we believe it wouldn't in humans actually elicit a psychedelic experience. Meaning you could take it, you could probably take it and be at work, drive, be out in the world, et cetera. There's a growing body of research that shows that psychedelic drugs in a really small sub-hallucinogenic dose can have a beneficial effect on kind of cognition. And this is what I think people who've microdosed for years have been saying. And now there's starting
Right.
to be some research that supports that. And Frank, clearly that's a way of taking a drug that's much more similar to how people are used to taking medication today. And the different patient groups that a drug like this, if it were to be successful, could address would be absolutely enormous, and a range of different indications, really beyond what sort of macrodosing psychedelic drugs are being studied for today. So things like juvenile ADHD or early stage dementia, and really enormous patient groups and therefore enormous market size.
I wanted to ask you as well about your library of IP, but actually more specifically, what your take is on patents and some of the controversies surrounding patents recently. So, for example, some of the issues with compass pathways, and then also just some of the legal barriers that might come into play with first generation drugs.
It's a great question. So really, Mindset's whole strategy was from the very beginning focused on how do we attain really strong intellectual property rights. And our point of view from the beginning was first generation drugs like psilocybin are great, but really they're a great proof of concept for what this whole class of drugs is potentially capable of. And we're going to focus on second and third generation drugs that haven't existed until now. Because they haven't existed until we discover them, we can get really strong intellectual property rights, which you call composition of matter. Now, the companies that are really stayed focused on first generation drugs, they have a different issue, because first generation, when we call them first generation, what we mean is they've been in the public domain for decades. So you can't patent psilocybin, you can't patent LSD, you can't patent DMT.
Right.
You can try to patent formulations of those drugs, but that really doesn't give you much in the way of a competitive barrier, because somebody can come along with a different formulation essentially and can compete against you. And you can't get what's known as in the pharma world, really the gold standard of intellectual property rights, which we call composition of matter IP rights. You can only get that with new drugs, which is what we've been focused on from the beginning. So those groups who are focused on the first generation drugs, I think we've only seen the beginning of the litigation that's going to unfold there. We specifically picked an area where we could really get kind of higher ground. And fortunately, for us, we filed our patents really before most of the other groups in this space. So that means from our standpoint, we think our ground is as high as it could get.
I wanted to ask you about patents as well. Well, pardon me, not patents, but just basically partnerships and what that really means to your business. So can you give us a bit of a walkthrough of some of the partnerships you've been involved in? And then also, what would your ideal partnership look like?
A couple of the partnerships that have been really, really key to us, obviously the Otsuka partnership, which we've talked about before. That's, as I mentioned, the first and still only big pharma partnership on new drugs. Biotech companies in general are faced with this kind of dilemma of, they need to advance their drug programs. That's really expensive. And so how do you kind of secure that capital and that funding before you actually have the results that you're looking for? Well, the very best scenario is what's actually happened with Mindset, which is that we have a big pharma that's actually sponsoring the development of roughly half of our new drug programs, and all that funding is non-dilutive, so it doesn't go towards buying a share or a financial instrument or anything like that. It essentially buys Otsuka a right of first refusal on those two families, and more importantly, really gets us access to their expertise. That's a huge partnership for us. Some of the other partnerships we're working with CAMH in Toronto. really trying on a study that I think is going to be really interesting and foundational science for the psychedelic space, where we're really trying to understand what are some of the actual biological changes in the brain that happen, and how long do they last? What's the durability of those changes after a dose of psilocybin? And we're also studying one of our lead candidates, MSP 1014, in comparison to psilocybin. So I think that's really interesting. That partnership wouldn't have come about if we weren't if our scientific team wasn't in the trenches, working, really kind of at the forefront of psychedelic science. And then, in addition to that, we're also working with some of the leading contract research organizations like Clerkenwell Health on, starting to engage with, regulators in the UK as, we start to plan out some of our clinical trials that we're going to be embarking on with some of our drug candidates. So yeah, that's just the beginning for us. We're seeing lots of interest from other groups and some of the other families in our portfolio, but I think partnerships really key for Mindset and a big differentiating factor in our business.
What are your upcoming catalysts for the next 2 to 4 quarters?
Yeah, so I think you're going to in the next, I'd say, 12 to 18 months, you're going to see, Mindset will have at least one drug into clinical trials, potentially 2. We'll be, in advance of that, we will be hopefully selecting a lead candidate from our programs in collaboration with Otsuka. You're also going to see us begin to kind of take the wraps off of some of the new families that we've been working on, the new drug families that go really from a structural standpoint are incredibly novel and go kind of really beyond where sort of psilocybin and DMT are today. And then lastly, another big focus for us is on really securing some more partnerships to help with the commercialization of the drugs of our other drugs, like we did with Otsuka. So definitely continuing to work on that, and hopefully we'll get to another partnership in the near future.
Well, thanks for joining me once again, James. That was very informative, and I appreciate the insights that you shared with us.
Thanks so much, Dwayne. Always love chatting.